Vulich, founder of Breaking the Silence in the Burbs. Originally from rural Illinois, Brittany has called Mequon, Wisconsin home base for the past 16 years. After graduating from UW-Milwaukee in 2012 with a double major in global studies and Spanish, Brittany was selected as one of 26 volunteers to serve in the inaugural Peace Corps cohort to the Republic of Kosovo, where she taught English as a second language from 2014 to 2016. She began her community organizing career as a volunteer, knocking doors in Ozaukee County to ask voters what issues mattered most to them. She was working as the financial director in the home stretch of a Wisconsin Supreme Court race when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020. Nationwide campaigns turned to digital organizing and outdoor events like ours. Likewise, Brittany went to work on several more campaigns focusing on digital organizing and canvassing to turn out the vote. That same year, Brittany founded Break the Silence in the Burbs, BSB, to create space in Milwaukee suburbs to amplify Black, Indigenous, people, and people of color voices for residents to show up in solidarity with demands for justice for victims of police brutality and call for systemic change. In partnership with allied and Black-led organizations, BSB co-organized marches, community conversations, and direct action in support of anti-racist policies. Brittany currently works as a digital organizer in the Redress Movement, a national organization aiming to effectively redress or repair the legacy of housing segregation. Please give a hand up for Brittany.
My notes here. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for the opportunity to come here and speak today. Can y'all hear me all right? This is good volume? All right. A little bit more? Oh, there you go. That's the sweet spot. Well, thank you all so much again for having me here today. I really appreciate it. And I just want to start off by saying how impressed and excited and encouraging it is to see so many young people gathered here today on their Saturday, getting informed and coming out and just getting together and saying, I'm making a commitment to get out and use my vote this election. So thank you all so much, and just, kudos to you. As mentioned, I started Break the Silence in the Burbs in June 2020 following the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer because, as the name suggests, the Burbs were very quiet in the weeks and the days following. It was especially deafening after going downtown Milwaukee and protesting in solidarity with the organizers and Milwaukee community, then coming home to Mequon just 20 minutes north and not hearing any of the anger and the rage and the grief that was so audible just 20 minutes away. But I do remember seeing folks sharing social media posts and hashtags like Justice for George Floyd, so I knew that there was a desire for accountability and systemic change. There just needed to be a space for folks to go, for them to take collective action. I also remember thinking the demand for accountability and justice cannot always fall on the shoulders of the same folks who are being oppressed or underrepresented or marginalized each and every time. And this is applicable for any oppressed or marginalized or unrepresented group, be it women, BIPOC folks, LGBTQ, First Nation, immigrant, differently abled. Way too often, the oppressed and marginalized and underrepresented also have to be their own and greatest advocates. And that to me is not what building community is about. Community is about taking care of one another and showing up in solidarity, even for the things that don't directly impact you, or even for when the things are working for you or you are feeling comfortable. And that is how I structured Break the Silence. By collaborating with Black and Brown organizers to amplify their stories, their voices, their calls to action, while calling on white folks to take a public stand to demand justice not only for George Floyd, but also accountability in our policing system and call out systemic racism in each part of our society, from our schools to our healthcare systems to our voting and election processes, which is what we're here to talk about today. Ensuring our elections are safe and accessible are two ways we can push back against voter suppression, especially among communities of color. In spring of 2020, as mentioned, I was working on the home stretch of Jill Karofsky's campaign for Wisconsin Supreme Court when the pandemic hit. And what seemed like every step to make voting during a global pandemic safer and more accessible was shot down by a specific subgroup of our state legislature and Supreme Court. For example, the governor tried to extend the absentee voting deadline as there was an influx of requests for absentee ballots that the USPS could not keep up with, and to reduce long lines at polling locations so as to reduce the number of folks in close contact with one another. He even tried to issue an order pushing out the date for the election the day before, Monday, April 6th. But as I mentioned, there is a group of folks in our state legislature who are currently still in office who didn't want to prioritize the health and safety of their constituents. And so they appealed to the state Supreme Court, which ultimately sided with the state legislature 4-3, just one vote difference. One of the dissenting judges, Justice Ann Walsh Bradley, wrote in her dissent, risking the health of our families and neighbors and friends, the majority mandates, i.e. the majority of the court, that in-person voting in Wisconsin's election must occur tomorrow, April 7th. And justifying its decision, the majority states that the law compels such a result. She wrote, nonsense. Neither the law nor common sense supports the majority's tenuous and callous order. Also decided the day before the spring election 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision here in Wisconsin, based on here in Wisconsin, requiring absentee ballots in Wisconsin election be postmarked or delivered by 8 p.m. on election day, squashing the governor's attempt to extend absentee voting to allow ballots to arrive to voter homes and have them returned and be counted. Further, according to a Wisconsin Public Radio article written that same day, Monday, April 6, 2020 was a very busy day. A day before the spring election, quote, just 5 polling places were set to be open in Milwaukee instead of the usual 180. Local leaders said that 45,000 city residents who had requested absentee ballots still had not returned them. As Milwaukee Election Commission Executive Director Neil Upright said, there's absolutely no way that population will have the opportunity to receive their ballots given postal delays, vote and return their ballots by tomorrow's election date. The number of outstanding ballots is significant, that 45,000, compared to the last Wisconsin Supreme Court election, in which again are being held in spring, in which Justice Brian Hagedorn, who voted against the order, he was one of those 4 who voted against that order, won his election by fewer than 6,000 votes. We saw voter suppression again that year in the fall presidential election, not only with insufficient number of polling locations, but threats to anyone who tried to provide relief to voters standing in line, like bottles of water or hand warmers. Then there is, of course, the big lie, that the election was stolen here in Wisconsin and several other swing states across the country, which triggered a recount. Guess which one of the cities were recounted here in Wisconsin? Milwaukee. And what were the results? The same. Joe Biden had won Wisconsin. But that wasn't good enough for that same group of folks in the state legislature. They actually hired a former Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice, Michael Gableman, in June 2021 to find evidence that the presidential election in Wisconsin was stolen. Well, guess what? 1 year and $1 million later, he didn't find any such thing. No indication of voter fraud. And he was fired about a month ago. You will continue to hear our elections aren't secure. You will continue to see hurdles put up to make it harder for voters, particularly in communities of color, to safely and easily vote. So that's why it's so important for you, the youth, the next generation, the newest generation of voters, to get out and help your community vote. Tell them what is on the line. Take what you heard here today. Go and look up, what is happening in your community around elections. What are the hurdles that you are hearing and seeing right here in West Bend and beyond? Volunteer to be a poll worker and a legal observer. And if you don't like what's on your ballot, go out and run for office yourself, right? There are so many resources and opportunities and people who are who are eager to have new and fresh faces and ideas in our offices, whether it's here at your local common council, your county board, the state legislature. There is a desire to have new and fresh representation at every level of government. So if you don't like what's on your ballot, you go out there and you run and make a commitment to support one another. Here, if somebody here was willing to run for office next year, who would chip in and help out their friends? Yes. Who would canvass? Who would door knock? Who would make calls? Yes? All right, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good number. I'll take it. So in summary, just thank you all for being here today. If all of what I just read sounds like absolute nonsense and overcomplicated and unnecessary, it's because it is. And so what you can do to combat that is use your vote. Do go out this November, bring your friends with you, and just keep up the good fight. Thank you.